Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall. Today, I'm joined by my favorite Australian and yours, Josh Lloyd, the host of the very popular Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, to answer some big questions about the New York Knicks. What kind of impact will Donte DiVincenzo make? What will the starting five ultimately look like? And what happens in the doomsday scenario? We might have to do a full episode on this one if Julius Randle gets hurt. That next.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA to enter promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you. Josh is going to talk about Birddogs a little bit later in the episode, but I had to very quickly note, I am currently on vacation in Arizona, and I have worn my Birddog shorts every single day. So big shout out to Birddogs for giving us a few pairs, and a hearty recommendation to you guys there about as comfortable and as good as any shorts I have ever owned. I wanted to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We are now available on all platforms. And if you're tuning in every day on all platforms, well, that would make you an everydayer, and that would make you one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. If you want to fit in that very elite company, all you have to do is subscribe on YouTube, hit that notifications bell so you never, ever miss an episode, and be sure to do the same on your audio podcast platform of choice. And I also want to remind you that we're now on Subtext. So if you don't want the fun to end on the podcast, well, now you can continue the conversation offline and on your phone by texting Alex and I. The link to do that and the phone number to text is in the episode description. So please go ahead, subscribe to that. We would love, love, love to get to talk to you. But who's shilling for subs? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. Again, we are joined by our top host here at Locked On, Josh Lloyd. If you're not already a fan, I highly, highly encourage you to go check out Locked On Fantasy Basketball. It is utterly unmatched fantasy basketball coverage. I have used it to win multiple leagues in the past, and Josh has an extraordinary level of insight into the league, and you're about to see just how smart he is about the New York Knicks throughout this episode. And without further ado, let's get into it right now with Josh.
We're here to talk some New York Knicks, a team that has been a little bit tough to project the last couple of seasons. It's been good, and then it's been bad, and it's fire everyone and trade everyone, and it's great again, and now we'll see. We'll see where it goes from here. There is a level of optimism around the Knicks, and we're going to talk about all of that in this show. But it is we're at the peak here. We're on the rise. We'll see where it goes now, Gavin.
Yeah, you know what? I've been a Knicks fan since the early 2000s, and you could even go a little further back than that and say this is the best state the team has been in. I think that's probably the right word for it. Obviously, they were very good in 12-13, and that was not very sustainable because half the team was 36 or older. So, yeah, I'm feeling good.
Yeah, I think you're right. I've clowned on the Knicks plenty of times in the past because they deserved it. But at the moment, things are looking much better. That doesn't preclude things going off the rails, and there are still some question marks on certain players and situations on this team, as there is for every team that we're going to talk about, but things are looking a lot better. First round playoff victory last season against the Cleveland Cavaliers weren't much of a match for the Heat, but that doesn't matter. They're building, and they're looking pretty good. Now let's talk about how the team looks. They weren't very active in the offseason, Gavin, just a few moves, and not really only one that matters, really. Donte DiVincenzo comes in. They also get Nathan Knight, Jalen Martin, and Dylan Windler to come on two ways, and they lose Obi Toppin, Derrick Rose, and Trevor Keels. But this is the change here. It is Donte DiVincenzo in, Obi Toppin out, and let me just address this straight away. That's a power forward gone for another guard, and there are no other power forwards really on this team, so I can't believe I'm going to say this. Is Tom Thibodeau playing small ball?
He's being forced to play small ball very intentionally because we've learned many a time he will not do so on his own volition.
Just wait. It's Jericho Sims and Isaiah Hartenstein together is what's going to happen, isn't it?
I mean, that is what happened last year when Obi Toppin got hurt. So, you know what? You can't it's a joke, but also it really happened. And you know what? They actually played exceptionally well during that stretch. So what do we know, Josh? Who are we to make fun of Tibbs? But I think this was kind of a calculated move by the front office to force them to, at least off the bench, play RJ Barrett, play Josh Hart at power forward, because at least on the offensive end, they functionally used Obi Toppin as if he were a wing or a guard. He was stationed on the perimeter, wasn't really played to his strengths as a ball screener and a rim runner. And that's obviously something, I mean, if you're going to use him that way, Donte DiVincenzo is better at all those things. Josh Hart is better at all those things. RJ Barrett maybe better at all those things. So I think it's a smart move, and there really isn't a backup power forward in the East that's going to make the Knicks pay for that. Now, if Julius Randle gets hurt, that's where you might have some issues.
Yeah, I think they're cooked if Julius Randle gets hurt, to be honest. But that's a question I'm going to ask you later on. But it is an interesting thing to do, because what I also think is that Josh Hart and RJ Barrett function better playing as power forwards. They might not be that size, but that's what their game is anyway. You can't rely upon them to shoot from the outside. Barrett's a bigger body who can drive a little bit. Hart's an aggressive rebounder and defender. Like, they actually play better. I'd rather Josh Hart play the 4 than be forced into playing the 2. Honestly, I think that's a much better situation. It does lead to some concerns, again, if Randle gets hurt. And that's why I was somewhat critical of... I wasn't critical of DiVincenzo contract, because in a vacuum, 4 for 54, whatever it was, is amazing value. I think he's a great player. I think that's absolutely worth it. My thing is, how does it make sense with Hart and Quickly and Barrett and Brunson and now DiVincenzo, where they're all, theoretically, all the similar sort of players, and Grimes, who plays similar positions, where it's like, okay, there's a lot of overlap here. We're going to have to see changes in roles from some of these guys. Also, you could criticize them for trading Obi Toppin for nothing, but once you make the mistake of making the draft pick, you can just keep making mistakes forever and not do anything about it. But like, just, all right, he's gone, we'll do something different. And I think that's totally fine. You're not going to get anything back from him. He wasn't good. You never showcased him. You never gave him an opportunity. You were never going to get anything more back. You accepted your mistake and you moved on. And I think that's a sign of a positive front office.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Obi certainly had some flashes. I think, last 5 games of 21-22, put up 27 points a game. Last 5 games this year, similar numbers. Like, he showed he can certainly be an excellent offensive player in this league. When given a real opportunity, that opportunity was just never going to come with Julius Randle leading the way on the Knicks. As for the DiVincenzo comment, I think it was an insurance signing in a lot of ways. With the possibility of a big trade, which may be something we're going to get into, always being on the horizon for Leon Rose, always nominally the agenda. I think there's an expectation that one of Quickly, Grimes, or Barrett will be dealt at some point this year, and at the latest next offseason. And I think DiVincenzo is a guy saying, like, hey, you lose someone like that, is a pretty good player you can slot into that position. Yeah,
totally. Like, and that's what I said. The contract for him is really good, and when that opportunity opens up, no problem. Now, the thing you mentioned there is, like, there's always a big trade on the horizon, but is there? Like, we hear about it. It never, ever seems to happen, and they seem which is totally okay. They seem very reluctant to do it, and I've got no problem with that, but the whispers are always there, but I don't know if that's a real thing or if it's just New York media being, well, a trade's going to come, or let's just throw the Knicks into a discussion about a big trade, because when was the last big trade they pulled off? I can't even think. Maybe it's something just blank in my mind. I can't think of anything.
It was Carmelo Anthony.
Yeah. That was 11 years ago, 12 years ago.
At least. Yeah. Yeah, I think they know they have the assets, I guess, to be in that conversation would be the best way to frame it. And I think, to your point on DiVincenzo's contract, something this front office has done really well is I think essentially all their contracts are positive value and have aged really well. I mean, RJ, I would say, is the worst one, and you could still make a pretty good case, especially given how he played in the playoffs, that's kind of a neutral value deal. And I think there could be a smaller deal trade or just trying to turn one of those guards into a bigger wing. There's a number of directions they can go, but I think the whole point of DiVincenzo was to give them more flexibility. And I think arguably in the meantime, again, given the role that Obi was playing offensively, like, make them better, even if some of these guys are not getting the right amount of minutes. And that's where I think things could get a little bit slippery from last year where the vibes were so good.
Let's talk about Julius Randle, because he sprained his ankle at the end of the regular season. He came back for the playoffs. He clearly wasn't right. He looked terrible. He's had terrible playoffs in the past. So is it to do with his ankle? Is it to do with the way the playoffs go? It could be a bit of both. But he did have ankle surgery in the offseason. Are we expecting him to be ready to go for training camp?
Yeah, he should be 100% healthy for training camp. And look, that was a question we were all asking. It was tough to gauge, because at times he looked like he could still move. It looked like he could still be pretty explosive. And then you'd see plays where he get his pocket picked at midcourt and he kind of just shrugs his shoulders and doesn't really even try to jog back. So there was certainly some inconsistent effort in the playoffs, but he needed major surgery this offseason. And you got to give him some credit for battling it out. The Knicks certainly still needed him. Obi wasn't really ready for that stage. But he's going to be my swing factor coming into this season, Josh, because you mentioned the Knicks up, down, that directly correlates with how Julius Randle has played in his 4-year tenure.
Yep, exactly. He's, for as much as I don't think you do, but I don't think he's their best player. Everything does surround what he does, whether He is good. He is bad. He is playing team-centric ball. He is pouting. He is giving no effort. Whatever he's doing, it's all to do with him, really. That's how the season's going to go, and we'll see how that ankle injury impacts it. We'll get to your starting lineup in a second.
All right, guys, we'll be back with Josh in just a sec. We are going to get into, when we return, my projected Knicks starting five, and I make my case for why Immanuel Quickley should be in there. Will he? That's a different question. And then we talk about the doomsday scenario. What would happen if Julius Randle got hurt? That next on Locked On Knicks.
But today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs, and people are going to be real shocked to know that I am wearing Birddogs again. I cannot get these things off, and I'm waiting for my next shipment to come because they are the best shorts that I've ever worn. They're the most comfortable things you could possibly ever wear, and this is what this copy says. Birddog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. I wouldn't be able to tell you what Lululemon feels like, but I know that it's going to be impossible for them to be better than what Birddogs feels like now. They have invented something called Cloud Knit fabric. It looks just like khaki, but it stretches, so you get that nice slimmer fit without having to sacrifice any movement. When you get these Birddogs, you're going to put them on, you're going to go, man, how did I live without my Birddog shorts? They're fantastic, and they've got this great new deal as well. So you go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA, and you get a free white tech hat. That's birddogs.com. I can't show you the hat yet. It hasn't arrived. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, or the promo code LockedOnNBA for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your Birddogs off. We promise you. And I promise you, I've got them on. But, you have to pay extra for legs. Let's go through to your projected starting five. Gavin, it is the same projected starting five that I have. And I tweeted this out yesterday, 2 days ago when this show's released. And I got pushback, and I didn't think I would. Jalen Brunson, Quentin Grimes, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson. I had many people go, it's not going to be Grimes. It'll be Josh Hart that starts. And I don't agree. Okay, talk me through it. Why am I getting pushback? Because I'm not embedded in Knicks discussion or Knicks fandom as much as what you are. Why am I getting pushback of Grimes starting over Josh Hart?
It might be that Hart, got that opportunity in the playoffs, but I don't see any way that's the case to start the regular season. The Knicks were actually dramatically better in the playoffs when Quentin Grimes was on the floor. And that was despite him not shooting very well, because he's one of the few guys in that starting lineup that gets respect from the perimeter and gets guarded out on the perimeter and gets treated like a capital S shooter. And you absolutely need that around Jalen Brunson, who worked magic, honestly, to get the Knicks to the third best offense in basketball. And statistically, this is an incredible statement, but it was true. One of the five best offenses in NBA history, given that they were a little bit less of a toilet bowl than in last year's, because Julius Randle really upped his number of three-point attempts, but Randle was still at only 35% from three. RJ Barrett was right around 31% from three the whole year. Mitchell Robinson is about as much of a magnet to the basket as there is any human being in existence in the NBA. So you absolutely need Quentin Grimes out there. I would also argue he's a better defender than Josh Hart. And he started, obviously, pretty much all of last year. So I'd be shocked if that changed. The shift that I would argue for is Immanuel Quickley in that starting lineup over RJ Barrett. That's not something that's going to happen, but Quickley was exceptional as a starter a year ago. So if there was going to be a change, I would hope it would be that. Again, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it'll be the same lineup that it was for most of last year.
Yeah, it's not going to be Quickley over Barrett, but I think it will be Quickley over Barrett at the end of games. And we saw plenty of success with that sort of situation. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But you're right, Grimes is the best shooter out of that group. He's the most deadly in terms of spacing. And while you say he is a better defender than Josh Hart, I do agree with that. That's a little bit unfair to Josh Hart, because Josh Hart's still let's say, second best perimeter defender on this team. I won't count Mitchell Robinson in that group. So, yeah, he is better than him, but Hart's still really good. But Grimes is a better option there. But they've got other guys there. But I agree. Like, it doesn't mean that Hart's going to play fewer minutes than Grimes. He might be one fewer minute. But it's not like Josh Hart came across and played 38 minutes a night straight after the trade. He settled into this little bench role. And how the minutes get distributed will be really interesting. Now, last season, Tom Thibodeau, again, I'll clown on this bloke so many times because he does dumb things often, and he has throughout his career. But when he made the decision, which goes against his ethos 100%, to take Evan Fournier out of the lineup, Derrick Rose, the guy that he's loved forever, out of the lineup, and replace them with younger, unproven players, that is completely against what Tom Thibodeau does, and it worked. So we're going to go back to this 9-man rotation, and the only difference here is Donte DiVincenzo replaces Obi Toppin. Remember, Juice McBride was in there until the Josh Hart trade, so you're going to have Quickley, Hart, Hartenstein, and DiVincenzo. I don't really have a huge amount to talk about there, but what the query is going to be is Quickley played 30 minutes a night last season. Josh Hart played 30 minutes a night. DiVincenzo played 26 for the Warriors. Obi Toppin played 12 last season. So who is losing out here? Or Are we seeing a sub 30-minute RJ Barrett?
That's the direction I would go. I think it's going to be a little bit less for just every one of the guards. Like I don't see any way you make this work and you justify giving Donte DiVincenzo $14 million a year without everyone losing a couple of minutes here and there. There's just no real way around it unless they go truly small and play Julius Randle at center, which again Tom Thibodeau has never shown any appetite to do outside of a couple of desperate fourth quarters where they were already down by 20 points.
I'd love to see the stats on it. I don't have them in here. I reckon he played 3 minutes total at center last season, and then they were like a plus 20 net rating in that time, and then he went, no, that was too good for me. I'm not going to do that. We're going to go back to this centers who never
wouldn't want that. Wouldn't want to win that way.
There was that one game, and then him and Toppin were playing the 4 and the 5, and they had this huge comeback, and then the next game, we didn't see it ever, and it just never reappeared again. I'm pretty sure it happened once last season. You'd know more than me, but I do distinctly remember that one game where it happened, and they had this massive fourth quarter, and then we just never saw it again, because that is the stubbornness that is Tom Thibodeau. This is an interesting team because there's only 2 players on this roster under the age of 23. There are a bunch of guys like Quickly, who's just turned 24. There's Barrett, who's just turned 23, who was young, but I'm using this youth focus as guys under 23. There's only 2 of them. It's Juice McBride and Jalen Martin, as they had no draft picks. And Jalen Martin, even the other two-way guys they brought in, Dylan Windler and Nathan Knight, are both 26, or Windler's almost 27. So there's not a lot happening here. McBride did crack the rotation last season. He's going to be on the outskirts here, but would you say that he's firmly is that sort of 10th guy in Tibbs's rotation that when someone gets hurt, that he's just going to step in and have a little bit more trust?
Yeah, I think he's one of the luxury pieces in the NBA. Like to have someone who's that elite of a defender as a 10th guy, it is a great option. And I think on different teams, he would be a surefire rotation player if his shot fully comes around. Last year, it was in the low 30s. In the G League in the past, he's put up 40% shooting from distance on high volume. So there's probably some internal confidence that if he's ever to get sustained minutes, that could come along. But I think similar to a lot of guys with Tibbs, like when those minutes aren't assured, you see kind of rollicking and inconsistent confidence in their ability to shoot. And in turn, you get inconsistent results. Again, Jalen Martin, just sort of an upside bet coming out of the Overtime Elite League. No
thoughts on Dimitrios Kapintsev, who was signed to an Exhibit 10. Some of the guys that the Knicks signed to their Exhibit 10s, Obadiah Noel and Dimitrios Kapintsev. I was like, okay, we're joking.
Gosh, I did not know the latter name existed until you just said it. So maybe that's an indictment on me. But.
Obadiah Noel and Dimitrios Kapintsev, they're 2 recent signings. But I reckon there is a lot of people who are watching this, and I don't know why I'm going to mention this, but that don't know that Isaiah Roby and Daquan Jeffries play for the Knicks, because those 14 and 15 roster spots on the Knicks never play. And the 2-way guys play like 2 minutes a night for 4 games. They just never play. And part of that is some injury luck and the tightness of the rotation. But these guys at the end of the bench, they just never get out there. And it's been about 3-4 years in a row that we just never see them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a world, again, where Julius Randle gets hurt. All of a sudden, Nathan Knight's really important. Isaiah Roby's really important.
Roby is very important in that situation.
The Knicks took a couple of swings at that spot. And again, questionable if either of them could provide much of anything. But there's a world for a 10-game stretch where 1 or 2 of those guys becomes really essential.
I'll make an argument here. It doesn't really matter because Obi Toppin plays for the Pacers now. I think Isaiah Roby is a better player than Obi Toppin, or has shown more as a player in the NBA than Obi Toppin has over the course of their career. Not saying he can ever develop into anything more, but he's not a bad player. And he's just sort of hidden at the bottom of that bench. And if he gets a chance, I think he'll surprise a few people. Now, this is the question that I was referring to earlier on. Is an injury to Julius Randle or Jalen Brunson worse for the Knicks? I know what my answer is.
I think pretty clearly Julius Randle. And to what you inferred earlier, I think Jalen Brunson is clearly a better player. I think what he did in the playoffs has kind of gotten underappreciated maybe in the national discourse just because the Knicks went out. Like you flash back to that Game 6, he was going 1-on-5 at times against the Miami Heat. The rest of the Knicks, I can't remember, the final numbers were something like 27 of 76 from the field in that game, and they were a possession away from forcing a Game 7 at home because Jalen Brunson was just that good, just that brilliant. And yet you look at the guy who replaces Jalen Brunson when he gets hurt. Yeah. It is Emmanuel Quickley, who last season as a starter, here, let me find it. I have the stats for you. He put up 23 points, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, shot 47% from the field, 40% from 3, 85% from the line with elite defense. That is borderline all-star in the Eastern Conference. Julius Randle, we just told you the names who are replacing him. It is apologies to Isaiah Roby's Oklahoma City resume. It is no one who has had incredible NBA success so far. And again, you have a coach who probably does not want to start Josh Hart at the power forward, probably does not want to start RJ Barrett at the power forward. So I think Julius is absolutely essential on both ends of the floor, even if his defensive effort is very inconsistent, just what he brings as a body with his physicality and the ceiling type plays he can make on that end. They absolutely cannot afford to lose him for any extended stretch of time.
Last year when I did this preview, I can't remember if it was with you or with Alex, we did it last year. Part of my concern with Brunson coming over was, will Julius Randle and RJ Barrett seed shots to enable him to be the number one usage player on this team? And Barrett did. Randle didn't really. He still took more shots per 100 possessions than what Brunson did. It was close, 24.4 versus 25.4 per 100. Is this the year that we see the switch there where Brunson does take more of those shots, or is that just too hard to get out of Randle's game?
I think it is the gap is going to narrow, and I would hope Brunson would be taking more shots. We can get into this a little bit more later, Josh, but the biggest area where he needs to be a little bit more of a chuck is from three-point range. Last season, he took just 4.7 threes per game, despite hitting just under 42% of them. Compare that to someone like Luka, who took 8. Dame took 11. Tatum took 9. Donovan Mitchell took 9. Kyrie Irving took 8. Julius Randle took 8 threes per game last year. So Jalen Brunson needs to up that three-point volume. It was kind of the first year in his career he really dabbled in self-created threes, and he was shockingly good at it, given in Dallas he was not only low volume but low efficiency on those types of attempts. That's a pretty easy area. You look at him doubling up those attempts or coming close to that for him to go from a 24-point per game scorer to closer to a 30-point per game scorer.
I'd love him to do it. I just don't know that he can do it. And you're right, he shot 42%. He actually shot 45% from 3 over the final 50 games of the season, which is insane. But there is a player who reminds me a little bit of Jalen Brunson. He's not the same player as Jalen Brunson now, but had some moments like this, who had these high three-point shooting numbers, but when it never was able to really get that volume up, and if he ever did attempt it, that the efficiency would plummet, and that's Malcolm Brogdon. When you'd see him shoot 42% from 3, he'd do it on like 3 attempts a game. He'd go, how about you take a few more, mate? And then he'd do it, and he'd be at 31%. Then he'd go back to high percentage on high volume. Brunson's always been a guy that's been around 28 to 30% of his shots coming from 3. Exact same number last season, and he hits them at a decent rate. He just doesn't take very many of them. So I do worry, and that's part of the thing when we look at fantasy projection for next season. Look at his numbers: 42% from 3. That's awesome. 45 over the last 50, but that might not stick at that level. And if that goes to 50% of his shots from 3, then you'd expect that to come down pretty sizably. And that was one of the other concerns with him, is he just doesn't generate steals at a high rate. And well, they're up a little bit. They are relatively low. So he was awesome. His efficiency was through the roof. But when you look at even like the final 10 games of last season, 60% from 2 and 46% from 3, I tell you which direction that can go. It's only one way, and it's down. So there are some worries if you're just looking at projecting, well, it's a trajectory going up. Well, there's only one way that sort of stuff can come down with Brunson. Now, I talked about this a little bit earlier. Has Tibbs softened? I talked about playing small ball a little bit more and getting the young guys in, but we have criticized, rightfully so, and I've done it a lot, him for his playing time and minutes. It wasn't that bad. Randle played 36, Brunson played 35, Barrett played 34 minutes, should have been fewer, but he wasn't in that insane situation where they're 50 points up with 10 minutes to go and everyone's playing to the final 30 seconds. Has Tom Thibodeau learnt multiple lessons in one season?
It's fascinating because sometimes it feels like it does. He did, and other times it's like, oh no, same old Tibbs. I was really impressed with what he did during the regular season. I mean, you mentioned removing Rose and Fournier from the rotation. Like he was, you could go back to what SNY's Ian Begley was reporting at the time. He was quite literally coaching for his job and pushed against the wall. He said, all right, why don't I just ride with the guys I actually think is the best, which of course, ideally you as an NBA coach, Josh, you would do to start the season. But you know what, not just for Tibbs, for a lot of teams, it doesn't always work that way. And they were fantastic over that stretch. Like he didn't purely do hockey line rotations as he did his first 3 years on the Knicks, even though the lineups largely stayed the same. Whether it was him or his staff, like continued to derive like pretty consistent improvement out of the younger guys on this team. Got RJ Barrett to pass more over the second half of the season, and particularly in the playoffs. And then you got to the postseason and you ran into some walls with him. And the most notable one was something I was referencing earlier. Josh Hart, who was against all odds an incredible 3-point shooter for the Knicks in the regular season, stopped hitting shots, and at points stopped wanting to take shots. RJ Barrett, of course, was still very inconsistent from range, and yet he continued to start those guys next to Jalen Brunson. And he continued to not play Quentin Grimes big minutes again until he was just pushed against the wall, and then he finally did. And lo and behold, the Knicks won Game 5 and nearly won Game 6, even though he didn't play Grimes down the stretch. But that was another one of those things that was just exceptionally frustrating to watch. And you can say that in one breath, and you can say in the other breath, like, he made like brilliant, consistent adjustments against the Cleveland Cavaliers and like completely outcoached JB Bickerstaff and allowed the Knicks in a series where they arguably had less talent to completely dominate. So there was some really good stuff and there was some really bad stuff with Tom Thibodeau.
A couple of quick questions. Quentin Grimes had an ankle injury in the playoffs, didn't he, as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So do you reckon that's part of the Josh Hart getting those more minutes and starting? I just completely forgot until right then, because I remember he had that crazy steal where he's like limping around and then jumped back up and got that thing. So maybe that's part of the minutes change. And the other thing with Tibbs, this is my Tom Thibodeau therapy session where I've got to go, man, I have to admit that he's changed, but I've also got to criticize him on something. How does a man who played and coached Joakim Noah to a top 5 MVP finish as a point center hub take a point center like Isaiah Hartenstein and for years and years and years turn his center position in lowest usage players in the entire NBA? It doesn't matter who's there. Robinson, Hartenstein, Noel, they're running at like 8% usage. Why is he so against the centers touching the ball ever? And Hartenstein is a guy that should be touching the ball. And we've heard those maybe complaints from Hartenstein's girlfriend about not being used correctly, which I 100% agree with. Why is he just gone completely away from centers? You're never allowed to touch it ever again, and that is my strategy.
Yeah, so I think it was a couple of things. He loved Nerlens Noel that first really good Knicks season during the COVID year in 2021, and I think since then he's basically been like, all right, how can I just have my backup center cosplay as Nerlens Noel? And even though that really is not Isaiah Hartenstein's game, he was to some extent trying to fit him into that mold. And I think a little early in the season, they were trying to give him an expansive role, and it just didn't click right away. And a big part of it was the injuries, the fact that guys like Cam Reddish were in and out of the rotation. Obviously, Evan Fournier, Derrick Rose were in and out. And as a facilitating center, a guy who doesn't have the ball in his hands, like even in, outside of a Nikola Jokic, right? But like even in the best of circumstances for Isaiah Hartenstein, he's not going to get a high volume of touches. And it becomes so essential that he gets an opportunity to develop chemistry and get reps in that role. And I think there were so many things going on, like it just stopped being a priority for Tom Thibodeau. And then they started winning despite the fact they didn't have that. And then there was, I mean, Tibbs, like, he's not going to make an adjustment in the best of times. He's certainly not going to make an adjustment when things are going well. To his credit, to Isaiah's credit, that got better the last 20 to 25 games of the season. He started being used as a hub a lot more. I think getting Josh Hart, who's an excellent cutter, helped a lot. Playing more minutes with Deuce McBride, who's also developed great chemistry with him, helped a lot. RJ Barrett was really good playing with the second unit, cutting off of Hartenstein. So I think it was a combination of Tibbs inputting that, Isaiah getting his confidence back a little bit, because he just started playing more aggressive on both ends. And I think that created a sense that like every part of his game was more accessible. And then that sort of went away in the playoffs again. So I guess we'll see where they're at to start the regular season. But my confidence was buoyed by how the year finished. All right, guys, that is it for part one of this conversation with Josh, because we ran so long. We're going to have another very special episode on Monday, and then we'll probably run part two of this one on Tuesday. Really excited to get into that. We answer some more big Knicks questions, including who the most likely guys are to get traded, who's likely to break out. You might know who it is if you've been listening to this podcast all offseason, and who is a regression candidate for the New York Knicks, before Josh and I play a Knicks-themed version of the Immaculate Grid, which was super duper fun. I did okay. You can watch for yourself and judge my performance. But until then, we will talk to you very, very soon on Locked On Knicks.